Hi, pals.
It's a bonus episode.
Bonus.
It's a bonus episode. It's a bonus episode.
Bonus. What's up, everybody? I am Kay Marie.
I am Lou.
I'm Mary.
And we are
Murked in the Midwest. Okay, so this week we do not have a regular true crime episode. We are doing some educating because it's Labor Day and some people are not working. We're not working, but we're working, but not really working.
Right.
Right.
And we wanted to do something different, shake it up, see what y'all think about it. And hopefully, I'm sure that some people know a little bit about this or maybe know a lot, and others may not. But hopefully, you enjoy it. Happy Labor Day. All right. So today, our episode is going to cross continents. Well, not continent, one continent, North America. And it is going to cross countries, though. We today are going to be talking about the Pullman Porters. If you guys are unaware of what Pullman Porters are, they were during the late 1800s and like 1900s up until like 1969 were the staff that occupied rail cars and basically took care of the people who rode on trains. So let's get into it. To begin, the Pulliam Company history, just to kind of make it clear of where we're talking about and how it began. The Pulliam Company actually started with George Pulliam. He founded the company in 1867, and his railway basically took the rail systems that were being created in the U.S. and gave Americans an opportunity and a way to cross the country and to get to areas that would have been before very difficult to travel. On average per year, his trains accommodated about 26 million people on average. And in comparison, I just wanted to look and see like what kind of numbers that was like. On the census from the U.S. in 1890, the census said that we had 62 million people. And when you put that in perspective to how many people rode his trains, we're talking about over a third of the population traveled by his trains to get from one place to another. When you put that into perspective, really it makes his trains, because they did operate like hotels because these were long voyages. It was like the largest operating hotel in the US, but it was moving. Okay. And George Pulliam ran this company until 1897 when he passed away. And then a little known fact, well, some people do know this. I did not know this, and I did know about Pulliam Company. After he died, the company was headed by Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln. And he was the president, the one who really uh, innovated and was known for what he did and transformed the company. So now that we know a little bit about the company, let's talk about the actual hierarchy and how the train was run. You had, of course, your train engineers, which were the ones who actually made the locomotive move. You had your conductors who were, well, let's start with the times that we were in. We were in America in a time that happened literally right after the Civil War. Okay. The engineers who were on the train were all white. The conductors who were on the train were all white. These were literally guidelines that were in their handbooks of what could actually happen and who could work in what capacity. So the conductors were basically like the people who supervised the cars. They had like a dining car. They had cars that were for where people would sleep ride, and then they had actual cars, which would be like your cooking car where the kitchen was and things like that.
Mhm.
So they just basically oversaw the different cars, and inside those cars, you had the actual workers, which were your porters. Porters were predominantly black. When I was looking it up, I actually did not find one instance where it spoke of anyone of any other ethnicity. And when you look back at the history of when this type of travel was really implemented and developed and expanded, um, George Pulliam knew exactly what he was doing when he got these workers to basically come be servants on these cars. It was right after the Civil War. He knew it was a bunch of slaves who didn't have jobs but needed to support themselves.
Mhm.
And he was like, "Hey, come work for me. You'll get paid.
He's like, I got the hookup.
I got the
Come on
hookup.
over here.
I got the job for you. Come see me."
Mhm.
And so, again, the porters were predominantly African Americans. And I do want to take a minute to talk about the other employees that were on the cars. There were waiters, which were predominantly black. And then there were maids, and the maids were black women. Now, not a lot is actually said and talked about the maids, but the maids, just so we can have a quick little overview about them, the maids were basically like the porters. They were black women. It was after slavery. They needed jobs to help support their families. And when they employed these maids, they worked in the deluxe cars where they would help women with their kids and help them take care of whatever they needed to have going on. So their responsibilities included caring for the children, shining shoes, sewing, pressing clothes, manicures, hairdressing, helping people wash their ass because they can't wash their
CNA before it was a
own.
CNA.
You know, it's real hard to wash. It's real, but these ain't sick people. These people who too lazy to wash their own ass.
Oh,
Okay, and right, and these services were advertised. Like he bragged about this because he was an innovator. There were other rail companies, but these rail companies didn't have the sleeping cars. They didn't have the like transportation that was super comfortable and deluxe.
Right.
Um, so he used this ad. He used basically black people's services like they were a product, pretty much like how we were before in slavery, looked at as like a product, and he advertised them in this manner and did it up until the 1950s. Okay.
Damn.
Yeah. So when you are looking at this, the porter's responsibilities, and I really just wanted to throw in the maids because they did not actually have a union. It doesn't say that they were included in the unionization that eventually happened for the porters. So I just want to give a shout out to the black girls because I'm a black girl.
Period.
Okay.
Black girl magic.
Right. So anyways, the porter's jobs included, not limited to, oh Lord, here goes the list. Get ready, y'all, because it's a lot.
Mhm.
They shine shoes.
Damn.
They valeted, which means they carried bags, packages, and cases. They serviced the cars, keeping them tidy, vacuuming, dusting, cleaning windows. Um, they were responsible for making sure that the meal carts came out to the dining room. Any type of extra that their supervisor, the white conductor, said they needed to do, um, they had to do it. It wasn't like, oh, well, that's not my job responsibility. It was either you do it or you don't have a job. And actually, in reviewing this and investigating and learning about the Porters, I ran across this TV show called The Porters. It was released in 2022. And if you want to see like a little bit of a glimpse into history of what actually occurred and how people were living and how these porters were treated, you should check it out. It's on Tubi. It's pretty good. Okay. But there were a lot of things. So this may seem like, oh, that's no big deal. They just worked, right? Well, here comes stuff where it's real jacked up. These men would work 400 hours a month. 400 hours a month. Now, most of us folks work a reasonable work hour of 40 hours per week. If you add that up, that's nowhere near
No, that's
400
only
hours.
160. That's only
Yeah.
160. Yeah, I saw somewhere where it was like they were to sleep for like 3 hours and then be up the rest of the time, or it was something crazy
No,
like that.
it was beyond crazy because they were expected to be on call morning, noon, and night, and to do it with a smile. And it was said that they actually used to joke that it was the miles of smiles because they would work and travel on these rail cars about 11,000 miles in a month, and they had to do it exhausted, basically disrespected, degraded, and do it with a smile.
Oh, right after
Mhm.
being freed from slavery.
Yes, because also the Porters were not referred to by their own name. They were referred to as George. And you would probably wonder, like, why they gonna call these men George? Well, they were referred to as George because in honor of George Pulliam, their new master, they were referred to that because back in slavery times, they generally would refer to the slaves by the master that owned them. So that went on for a very long time, where they weren't even given the respect
You
of
ain't
being
finna
called.
call me no George.
Well, they did, and if you didn't like it, you could just kick rocks.
I'm gonna go kick them rocks.
I guess I'd be a rock kicking motherfucker.
I got a rock.
George.
Like,
Okay. So they would work these 400 hours a month, which was generally about 20 hours a day. And they were, if they
20 hours a day.
yes, if they slept beyond those
24 them things in one day, right?
if you slept beyond that 4 hours, they would deduct it from your pay.
Which already wasn't.
Oh, y'all want to know what the pay was? Let's talk about it.
No.
Okay, it is really actually disheartening. So their wages, which if you could call them wages, was $72 on average per month. And I know it was a different time. Things cost a whole lot less. Inflation was so down. It was not really that expensive to live back in that time.
I
But
spent $72 as soon as I walk out the front door.
but this is 2023. We're talking about in 1890 to 1920 times. That money would have gone.
Still been expensive.
I mean, honestly, if you think about it, like I look at my grandparents when they bought their house in Gary. I believe my mom told me that house cost a couple of thousands of dollars. Okay, so we're talking about a totally different time. But when we get in these wages, you're gonna see. So they were paid on average about $72.50, and that was the minimum that they were paid per month. The average, I'm sorry, was $78.11. And then they also made tips, but they needed their tips to survive because the wage was so low. The average tips per month were $58.15. However, deducted from their pay that they made, they had to pay for their meals, their lodging, even though they holding them hostage on the train. They had to pay for their uniforms. They had to pay for the products that they used to shine, the patron shoes. No, ma'am. That was all what was required of them. Also, if a client came on that train and stole the towels or stole the water pitcher,
It was then deducted
out of their pay. Yes.
So they basically got paid after you deduct everything. They probably had what, $40 left for working 400 hours.
For
now, 400 hours, I'm getting $40.
Now listen to this. In contrast, the conductors, so the ones who were the supervisor of the car, that were all white, y'all. Okay. Those conductors made on average at minimum $150 a month. Okay. And in that $150 per month, they really only worked about 240 hours a month. So they worked almost
half the amount of hours, and
and got paid more than double.
I bet you their room and board was included.
Their room and board was included. Their uniforms was included, and their meals were included. They were not charged.
They didn't have to pay for anything. They had basically this money to blow.
Yeah,
it's not like you about to get off the train and take a walk somewhere and go to the store.
Exactly.
You was on this moving prison, so you got this money left to just do whatever you want to do with
it. And not only that, they were provided health care at the low price of $23 per month for their whole families.
Well, damn.
Whereas the black folks, the porters, the poor porters,
the ones that wasn't making nothing and working twice the amount of hours,
were not even offered the option for health care.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay.
Because fuck our health, right?
Of course. We'll get to that. That's a whole nother episode. Let's not talk about that today. Okay. So then we get to, we got through what these people, what the porters actually, what their day-to-day life was like on this train and how they worked. Their services, like I said, were utilized right after the Civil War and all the way through the 1950s. The last Pulliam car actually ran up until 1969. Then it was bought out by another train company, and then that service went away because trains, buses, and stuff started to become more readily used.
Which is crazy because 1969 was just 54 years ago.
Right. Also, so the other part of it is when you think about this and you think, oh, well, these people are riding the trains and they're getting this luxury service, you would think it's the wealthy, right? No. Okay.
Eat the rich.
Okay. These services, George Pulliam was very strategic in how he did his business. He planned this business because he wanted to make it where the regular average American could get these services, but feel like they were rich and wealthy. Okay. So he knew he had these African Americans who were no longer slaves and they needed a job.
They had nowhere else to go. So it's like, what better? Like, what else am I going to do?
Mm-hmm. And then you were giving regular Americans who were not accustomed to having servants, not accustomed to having butlers, maids, you're giving them this service like, hey, look, you can feel affluent too. So it was like the perfect dynamic for him to make all of this money. Okay.
You got people spending money they don't have to give to people who need the money, but they're not really receiving it.
Exactly. So that's really how the company ran and what the porters went through. Also, there were some other conditions that went beyond, but those things go into the things that we kind of know happened during that time. You had Jim Crow laws. You had the porters and maids and waiters were afraid of losing their job if they did any small type of infraction or if they were accused by a guest of doing something inappropriate. If they did it or not, they didn't even investigate. It was just like fire them. So, of course, they got tired of these types of conditions.
Okay, so sidebar, let's talk about a fucked up fact I learned while researching. So, as a joke, a society for prevention of sleeping car porters, George was founded in 1914 by George Delaney, a lumber baron.
Mr. George Delaney.
The lumber baron.
Membership was granted to anyone with the first or last name George. And that's weird because I know a lot of George's first and last name, so I'm kind of looking at shit kind of different right now.
It ain't a lot of black folks though, is it? Or do you know a lot of black people named George?
I know a lot of people named George, but it's because of their grandfathers. They were named after their grandfathers, and then I have like 3 friends with the last name George.
Yeah, but you can't help.
That's just what it is. But it's just like, damn, like, so if we were still back in those times, it'd be like
George, get
my water, George.
Shake your glass, George. Come on, George. Yeah, George.
Right.
Come on, George.
Notable members included
Admiral George Dewey,
King George,
Jesus Christ.
George Ade, George Hernan, Babe Ruth, Georgia Senator Walter George, Georgia. That's kind of funny.
There's something about that Georgia.
And then George Clemenceau.
Yeah, he was a French politician, right?
Yeah. So now, even in mockery, the group did actually end up having many great influences.
But they had got up to what, like 31,000 members, right?
Yeah, it was. They literally sent out membership cards, and it was done by their secretary. She sent out membership cards to anyone, anybody named George.
And this was all, like you said, as a joke, but it was because this George Delaney guy didn't want the Porters to be called George, not because he was sticking up for them and like these are humans and they have names and they should be called their names, but because he felt like my name is George and it's calling them that is degrading the name George,
which is wild.
So I'm gonna get all these Georgie Porgies together, so we can
stop the bullshit.
So they can stop bringing down the value of our name,
right? Of our good white name,
our George.
George. That reminds me of like in French, like they'd be like garçon, garçon, garçon. Mm-hmm. So, if by 1926 the Porters who were on duties, names will be displayed on a card of the rail car they were working on. And roughly there are 12,000 porters that worked for Pulliam. Only 362 actually were named George. So that is kind of fucked up. Imagine somebody calling you somebody else's name on purpose. If somebody even called me the wrong name, I don't even respond like now because I know you're not talking to me.
If you just mispronounce it, I was looking like, who are they talking to?
But here's the thing, sorry, it's not funny, but it's funny. But imagine, so this joke gets it to where now I get to be called by my real name, and so everybody's like, man, they're finally gonna call me by my real name. But there are still 360 some people on that goddamn train whose name actually was George. Like that right there is wild. It's like one of those like.
So do y'all like do George A, George B, George C, George?
And imagine working on that train and you're a porter. I'm sure there was more than one porter per car. It had to be. If you got multiple tables, people wanting food, you got to have a couple of people.
Every time the name George was called,
everybody looked around. What? Huh?
Or we all got to walk over there.
So somebody say George. Yeah. Everybody.
So then it's followed worse by not only are you now George, but once everybody's looking, now you're you.
Yep.
You. To specify which George I'm talking about. Hey, you, come here. And that right.
Or if they didn't get the boy.
George come with the missing side tooth.
Boy. So that's grown ass man being called boy.
Even like today, I don't even like I get it. It's different. Like if you with your homegirls and you's like, girl, like let me tell you, or girl, that's different. But when it's somebody else, like especially like an older person or like
it is different because the intention came from a different place.
Yes, it came from a derogatory place.
Exactly. Even currently, if an older person went to call me girl, like that happens multiple times at work, it's not coming from a place of degradation.
Now, when it is,
yeah, but
and I had a boss like that. He was like, "Hey, girl, what are you doing today? What are you working on?" And I'm like,
sir, did you just come back?
I'm working on keeping my
I'm like, you see this name badge right here? My name is nowhere near girl or boy or whatever you want to call it. Like, don't do that. I hate when people do that, and I think they still do it today to be funny. Because some people are still wrapped up in the 1940s and the 1950s that they feel that they can
make
get
America
away.
great again. Bring it on back to the old days.
Like no, like I will curse you the fuck out. Like no,
we are not our ancestors. Not at all.
We literally will beat your ass.
I think we showed that with a chef.
The Alabama Slammer.
So now we get to the point of the unionization, right? So as early as 1900, porters had been rallying and organizing, trying to get better wages, better hours, job protection from false allegations and minor infractions. Like they were coming together, banding together, really trying to get this done because they're like,
we can't live
like this, And so
can you imagine just trying to support your family? At every turn, you're just getting harassed.
Yep.
Beat down.
And so, and that's what it was met with. It's like in the beginning, stuff like that, they were mostly met with termination.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you're speaking up to say, hey, you're not paying me enough, or these hours are crazy. I'm only getting 3 hours of sleep a day and expected to work the rest of the day. So they would be terminated. And so that they would use them to make an example, and like they'd make a big deal of it, of like, like, this person is getting fired because they weren't satisfied with what we gave you.
And you're getting a lot.
You're getting a lot. It's more than you had before. Like that was the key. It was like, you were a slave before this. You were freed and you had nothing. I did you a favor.
Did you a favor.
Yeah, and that was the attitude that they had.
And before you had to work 24 hours a day, and now you only got to work 20. What are you complaining about?
Exactly. So, in 1918, the order for sleeping car conductors banded together in Kansas City and was organized, but the stipulation was you could only be white. So, it was whites only.
So we've gotten to the point where the car conductors have unionized, and with really, at the end of the day, like, something that really does need to be said, and really when you think about work conditions, I believe that racism is a divide that is used to keep poverty, people who are less, like lower income, to keep them divided.
Of course.
Because when you really look at it, it wasn't like the white workers that were conductors. Yes, they had it better than the black workers. However,
but
they still didn't have it great.
Yeah, no, they still should have been making more.
They should have been making more. They were serving these people who were coming on this train. They were getting this luxury service at discounted prices. And they were working long hours, even if you account for 240 hours. That's much more than what we work in a day.
Yeah.
When you were hurt at work, they had benefits for their family to go see a doctor, but there was no such thing as short-term disability. There was no such thing as, oh, you hurt yourself real bad, long-term disability. Those things did not happen. Those things actually came through labor movements and people sticking together. So the racism really was meant to keep workers divided and keeping their power low, because they knew, and this is speaking of that 1%, they know that when people band together, when they use their actual bargaining power to collectively come and say, no, you're not going to treat us workers like this. We are not taking this bullshit. They know they can't do anything about it because it's way more of us than it is of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So anyway, back to the actual topic.
But I think that's why they would take, make examples of people when, some would stand up to kind of like instill that fear of, like, yeah, it's more of y'all, but this is what will happen if you stand up. And,
yep.
It was all that trying to establish dominance. Right.
So, a man by the name of A. Phillips Randolph, he was a labor unionist, and I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him or not. I had heard of him, and what I knew about him was that he had publications that were passed amongst the population of African Americans that kept them informed about actual civil rights actions and movements of labor. He was very predominant pretty much all over North America. He did work in Canada. He did major work in New York and got elevator operators to unionize. He was really a forerunner for unionization and for civil rights. Yeah. But anyways, the publication that he produced was called The Messenger, and in it he often wrote about the Porters' plight, about the things that they would go through, how hard they worked, and their working conditions. Even though he was never really a labor worker, he still stood up and spoke for the working man. So because of this, the car porter saw that he actually, kind of was like rocking with him, and he was, saying, hey, like, the way they're being treated is not right. And so for this, he had a lot of respect from them, and they looked up to his ideas and the way that he got things done. And they were like, you know what, dude? We need you. We need you to help unite us because clearly you know what's going on. You know how to make things happen. And so in 1925, they finally were able to convince him and they appointed him as the president of what was called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Um, and in this, you know, he brought out really good things in the actual workers to get them to stand together, but he also brought a lot of things to the table as far as bargaining. So he really drove home in the movement the need for people to stick together and not lacking and giving up because things get hard. He really, just stressed unity and holding their ground against the tactics that the Pulliam Company was using to break up any form of solidarity. So in the early 20th century, we're talking like early 1920s, well, actually like 1910 to 20, um, the railways just they exploded because you have to think about things that were happening in history.
Right.
The move to the west was like it was there and people needed to get there. So say you lived in New York and you got family, out in Wyoming, Montana, you want to get there, you want to see them. Do you really want to take a horse and buggy and go across the mountains? Well, I'm gonna just ride my horse there. I might get there by next week. So, in that vast changing environment, the rail cars just started to really be utilized. And in that, of course, they employed more porters, they employed more waiters, they employed more maids, and more Americans were actually utilizing this service. So, of course, when you have more actual activity, what do you think happened? You think the conditions got better? Or you think they got worse?
They got worse.
I think they got so much better because I'm an optimist.
She's so cute.
They got worse.
They got worse.
Look at the time we're talking about here.
Yeah. And at this time, you start to see, we are getting ready to go into World War II. And then you're going to see an uptake in the Jim Crow laws, and things definitely got worse. One thing, I didn't actually see it in any actual literature of my research, but when I was watching the show Porters, um, there was one episode, and it was not even a part like it wasn't like a part of the show where it was at the forefront, but it was just like this side action that was happening.
Yeah.
And it was a porter was down on his knee, and it was a white man with his son sitting in his lap, and he had the black man holding out his lip, and he was a dark skinned black man, and he said, "Sometimes they're pink like that, son, and sometimes they're spotted like he's an animal showing something on Animal Kingdom." It was really actually disgusting to watch, but I have to say,
I won't be watching it.
I mean, okay, so normally
then I'm gonna be walking around pissed off.
Really, and I have to say that, like, sometimes, have y'all ever like gone to, I don't know, like a museum where they have like Black history? Like, I went to in Memphis. We went to the Lorraine Hotel, so the Civil Rights Museum.
Yeah, I went there.
And when I tell you, first of all, I cried so much. It was like I had no tears left by the time I left. But the atrocities that humans can do to other humans when they think that they are better than the other is disgusting.
It's as simple as that. Yeah,
it's like, disgusting.
That's like the plainest explanation of it. When humans think that they can do whatever they want to other humans simply because they think that they're better.
Yeah. It's wild. And I remember going past this bus, and I knew about like why Martin Luther King was in Memphis at the time. It was also a labor movement that was happening, and I knew about the buses that were bringing people there. But there was one specific bus that they had inside of the museum that was charred out, and they had actual recordings of the people that were riding the bus before the bus was set on fire. They were singing, they were talking, and they were talking about this family that happened to be on the bus, and it was a woman who happened to be white with her kids, who was going to stand for the fact that these are humans who are being treated deplorably. And she just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with some hateful ass people who set them on fire. So it's just like those type of things are wild to me. So like this show, it definitely did bring up some like how can people be so disgusting and so evil and so heartless and all those things. But that's the history. That's what happened. We can't gloss over it. It is what it is.
Okay, so just so a fact that you know, so A. Philip was actually he was supposed to lead the Million Man March, and this was supposed to be 20 years before Martin Luther King led it.
Yep.
And so the march was actually halted though because of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
So him and A. Philip actually had like this relationship where they were in contact and they were discussing things, and
it was said Franklin D. Roosevelt actually admired
A. Philip.
Yeah, he admired Randolph because of his clarity in his talk. They said that he was an excellent speech giver. He was very intelligent. And he had a way of speaking to people and not down to people, but speaking to them and getting them to understand the plight of others.
Okay.
And Franklin D. Roosevelt actually really admired that about him.
Okay, so much so that he issued an executive order which banned discrimination in the industrial industry. And so because trains industrial. They didn't want to get sued
because they got to make the money, y'all.
It's all about the money,
dollar bills, y'all.
So after Franklin D. Roosevelt passed this executive order based on the things that A. Philip had done, the Porters now had better wages. They had health care offered to them.
Less time work. They didn't have to work 400 hours a month,
less
y'all.
time work. And so this was the first time
in history
and has not happened since where a union came together and against a
large corporation in that manner and made them do what they wanted.
Exactly.
They bent to their request.
Exactly. This is the first time it's ever happened, and it hasn't happened since. And that right there is amazing. It's a testament as to what can be done when you actually, when you continue to stick through it, because like things are going to happen that knock you down, or they're going to try to discourage you. They're going to try and make you feel like you know what, it's not worth all the pain and the heartache and things of that nature. But just imagine the relief they felt knowing that everything I've been through, from slavery, being free, to getting trapped into this different form of slavery,
servitude, really,
and now at the point where I got everything I asked for, to be making more healthcare, less hours worked.
And so, not saying that unions don't bargain and get things, but generally there's concessions that have to be made. And it was the first time in history where there were no concessions. They had no concessions that were made. All of their demands were met, as they should have been, because all they were asking to be treated was like fairly.
So this was a bonus episode for you guys, but fun fact.
So some fun facts, just some other little things that I learned through doing this, adding in and tying in Black history. We all know who Rosa Parks is.
Gang, gang.
Hello, she said I ain't getting up out this motherfucking chair. So
move, who? Not me.
Right, who you talking to, boo? She actually, we know that she was what was the catalyst, or what a lot of people refer to as the catalyst in the civil rights movement. But when you look at the backstory and actually why she was a catalyst to the civil rights movement, she was the secretary for the Sleeping Car Porters union's president, and his name was Edgar Nixon. When he found out that she was in jail, of course, they helped with her bail and get her on out of there. But then they were like, we are not standing for this. This is unacceptable. And so they reached out to, of course, what still is a pillar in the Black community, the churches. They reached out to them and they said, look, we want y'all to stand with us. We are talking about this. We are dealing with it. We are mobilizing. We are strategizing. We are moving. Okay. And this is what we're going to do. And being the area that it happened in, they contacted all these ministers and pastors. And what I didn't know, and which was kind of interesting to know, is that Martin Luther King, when he was reached out to by Edgar, he was like, "I'll get back to you. Do not talk to you later because I got stuff to do." He was out thoughting and plotting.
Plotting and
He was
plotting.
not like
I like it.
he was not at the I'm about to jump in and be the leader of this movement.
He was like, "Nah, boo, I got stuff to do. She down the street, she's looking a little hot." Anyway.
The streets are calling me.
They are calling.
Outside.
Outside. Anywho, so he was not, he was a little reluctant to actually get started. And he was like, "I'll get back to you." And Edgar told him, he said, "You know what, dude? Like, that's cool. You want to get back to me, but I'm letting you know we're gonna be in your church.
Be in your church.
We all gonna be there, boo. We're gonna be there. We're gonna be talking." And then of course, then probably this is all me spitballing and imagining how things went. He was like, "Wait a minute, this is my church and I am the pastor. And what do you mean you're gonna be in my church telling me what's going on up in my church? So I'm gonna be there." And kind of, it sounds like in history, it was like the Porters, they were instrumental in movement and unionization, civil rights. They made things happen. So I mean, I take my hat off to them. Like, thank you for the things that you have done for us to make it where a working person can make a working wage and have dignity and respect.
Absolutely. So we hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, you can always reach us at our email, murkedinthemidwest@gmail.com. We are on Instagram. We also
Murked in the Midwest.
Murked in the Midwest. And we are also on TikTok now.
We follow us.
Facebook. So go follow us. Don't forget to send us suggestions of what you would like to hear, feedback. We love any type of positive, constructive.
Don't be mean.
Criticism,
right?
Whatever the case may be, we want to hear from you guys. So we will see you guys and talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye. If you have any time on your hands and you want to actually kind of see and experience, the things that the Porters worked in and their conditions, and get more information about it, there's actually a national monument that was put in place by our lovely President Barack. He's always my president. But anyway, that he put in place, and it is actually in downtown Chicago. The address is 610 East 111th Street, Chicago, Illinois. And it is the national monument that recognizes the Pullman Porters and the things that they put in, their efforts that they put into unionization and bettering our country.